hearing virtually via Zoom. And this hearing is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to the public health accommodations and necessities of the moment. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, excuse me, Verizon 9 and Verizon 964. It will be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Docket 0422 will require public bodies to provide a remote participation option for all of its public hearings and meetings except for executive sessions as allowed under the open meeting law. This ordinance requires that the notice of public meetings and hearings be posted at least 7 days prior to the meeting date unless there is an emergency as defined as section 1-8.1. The proposal provides standards for the publication of meeting agendas and minutes online, requires video and audio recordings of all open sessions of a public body. The purpose of this proposal is to increase access and participation in the meetings of public bodies. Joining us today from the administration are Chief David Elko from DeWitt and Edward Merguier from the Office of Neighborhood Services. We also have councilors, again, Councilor Mejia is with us right now. We've also been joined by Councilor O'Malley. And I do know that Councilor Liz Braden will be joining us shortly. We have also the organization's Boston Center for Independent Living, Jim Weiss, Student Immigrant Movement, Sabrina Barosa, and the ACLU, Kate Crockford, will be joining us also in to discuss this, this ordinance. Again, this is an ordinance that would require the City of Boston to basically provide remote participation option for all of its public hearings and meetings. I do understand that the administration is here and may have some introductory remarks, but before we go to you, I'd love to open up the floor to Councilor at Large Julia Mejia for any opening remarks.
Hi, good morning, all. Really excited to be joining you. Thank you to the chair and to Councilor Breeden for bringing us on as a co-sponsor. I'm currently in the Dominican Republic as evidence of how effective and important this virtual hearings have been. We've heard from so many people who are participating in their community for the first time thanks to Zoom and other virtual meetings. We have an obligation to continue to offer this resource for residents so that we are creating space for all means all in our city government. And not even being on vacation could keep me away from being here present as one of the co-sponsors. This is an issue that has been dear and near to me along the way. And so I'm happy to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilor O'Malley. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. You'd think I would know by now. First off, I'm very jealous that our colleague, Councilor at Large Julia Mejia, is in the DR. We wish her well, and please send our love to our neighbors in DR and our dear friends and family members. But wanted to also pop on this hearing just to underscore my support. It is truly remarkable how, and perhaps I shouldn't use the word remarkable because it's the spirit of our people that allowed us to just, without missing a beat, weather part of the pandemic by staying connected and embracing technology in such a way. And we used it as a council. And as I took over as council president pro tem, I asked that despite the fact that there are some restrictions now being lifted or perhaps going back to the old ways, embracing technology for our civic duty is something that we ought to be doing. So simply by allowing the option, it's what I've done as council president pro tem. I leave it up to the respective committee chairs as to how they're going to hold their hearings. I fought hard to make sure that the governor's temporary extension of these powers would continue. They have. They will far outweigh my time in office, and that's a very, very good thing. But I just wholeheartedly endorse the plan by the chair, by Councilor Braden, by Councilor Mejia, to allow this. We have seen unprecedented civic engagement over the last 16 months. We've also been very intentional in terms of not only embracing technology, but embracing language access as well to make sure that everyone who's participating and wants to participate can do so. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that we should all be remote at all times. I, for one, will look forward to holding hearings in the chamber, but allowing interactive, both folks to testify in person by leaving written comment or by Zooming in, as we've been able to do, is the right approach. So this is a very smart ordinance, one that I support, and it's a very simple. It just underscores the simple notion that anyone who wants to be part of these deliberations will have the opportunity to do so. So count me in as a sponsor and someone who's very excited for this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a quick remarks from me. One, I not only do look forward to having in-person meetings and hearings, but I also know that we actually can be more efficient and have a couple going on at the same time. If we had one remote and one in person, we could do actually a lot more as a city council. That's just selfishly thinking about, what we could get done on our plate. But also the aspect of this being truly accessible for our members in the disability community is something we shouldn't dismiss. And also representing the large population that I do of immigrants in East Boston, knowing that, for the first time, and it's sad to say, for the first time, a lot of our hearings were being simultaneously translated. People were participating at a level and inclusion in their own languages that I thought was something that we otherwise had a little bit harder time at doing. It was actually more expensive to try and get the headsets for everybody in a room. Sometimes you had to then have people register and by what language, and it was a lot harder to coordinate versus just being able to get people on the channel and then telling people turn into this channel and listen at the same time. So the advantages, I think, far outweigh the disadvantages or inconveniences. And I do want to acknowledge that the practical implication does matter. And we, as a city council, never want to get ahead of the hardworking individuals who are part of making the notice available to the public. And I do know that there's a good conversation to be had about whether the 7 days notice is actually feasible. And if there's what kind of flexibility we could work with to make sure that we are not overburdening the hardworking central staffers, the hardworking folks at neighborhood services who are literally the front end of trying to make sure that people have notice. So I did want to acknowledge that we are open to that conversation and making sure that the notice balances the practical realities of the hardworking folks at the city of Boston. But again, this is about access to the public process, and we need to make sure that there's just more of it. We know that. This is also, along with the 7 days notice, there is an exception, of course, for 48 hours if need be. We want these things posted online, and we want the meeting minutes posted in a timely manner, which within 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later, posted online, and the recorded conversations as well. And so this is, we do have an enforcement aspect of this as well. I know that that's going to come up, and I want to make sure that that was very clear that it's only about the intentional violations, not people making a mistake, not people being overburdened. We're not talking about people trying to adjust to a sudden pandemic. We're talking about intentional attempts at trying to not provide access to people online. And I don't know anybody actually in the city of Boston right now who does that. I'll say that. So we can get right into it. And I have the administration. I don't know if you have some opening remarks or if you're here to go the back and forth. I figured you guys could go ahead. And then since we only have 3 proponents, or if you will, guest speakers that signed up, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them as a panel, and then we can have the full-on conversation. Okay? Between David and Edward, or Ed, whatever you prefer.
Works.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor. We're fully supportive of this. I mean, a lot of the things that are already in the ordinance are practices that we have implemented at the Office of Neighborhood Services. I know, working alongside Do It, we've continuously pursued to make our presentations more available and equitable to the public. We're making sure that we're focusing on the different platforms that are available to us, from WebEx to Zoom, to see which ones fit best. And we're constantly in communication with the language access team. The demographics of the city are changing dramatically, and they're changing since the creation of the office. And we're seeing that we need to focus primarily on making sure that we're able to get more people in. I'm a senior veteran of facilitating meetings for a number of years now. I have to say that the virtual setting has been fantastic. A lot of people are participating that have not participated before, but we do recognize that a hybrid version of this needs to continue for the future. And so we look forward to having this dialogue and hoping that we can get to an end where we can implement some changes and also, make sure that in the future we include all people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. David?
Good morning, Councilor Edwards. I really don't have a lot to follow Edward's comments. So, we are also in support of this. We know, through the last almost, year and a half, how important, access and participation is in municipal government. And we've been seeing kind of record numbers. There are some things to, definitely, talk through around, from language access to, something that we talk a lot about, digital equity, and making sure that people have the ability to participate in the process. But, we as Eddie said, we, very much involved with, different parts of the administration to make sure that we support this going forward. As we looked at lessons learned through the pandemic, what has worked, what hasn't worked, this definitely has fit into a category of something that, that has worked and has, shown record number of people participating in the process, which is always a great thing. So, I'm ready to roll up the sleeves and get right down to it. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Councillor, and let's get started.
Thank you. We've been joined also by Councillor Flaherty and Councillor Flynn. Councillors Flynn and Flaherty, did you have any brief remarks?
Good. If I may, Chair, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Council Edwards, and Braden and Mejia, for filing this important ordinance, and for you, Madam Chair, for hosting the hearing this morning. COVID-19 has changed many things about how we live our daily lives, and this carries over to our jobs. And I think one of the biggest shifts for the council and for the city as a whole was the introduction of remote hearings and meetings. And while it took some time getting used to for us as a body, as well as the Herculean efforts from Kerry Jordan and our TV operations and technology crew, the biggest impact of the shifts was felt by the public, and it made it much easier for them to access us and engage with us on important policy matters. So I believe that we've seen unprecedented level of involvement. As the longest serving of the member of the council, I can't remember a time when we had such participation. So, particularly as well as our city budget process as well. So I think our democracy as a whole has improved by this increased public engagement that has happened through Zoom. So I support the makers' efforts to preserve that positive change through this ordinance, and look forward to a lively discussion, and appreciate the administration's involvement today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Good morning, Councillor Edwards. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I can't see the screen, but can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and thank you to the sponsors as well. Thank you to the administration. Thank you to the administration.
Oh, you know what? I promoted him to a panelist in the middle of his comments. I'm not good at this. So sorry. I promoted you to a panelist in the middle of your comments. My apologies.
That's okay, Councillor Edwards. I just want to say thank you to Councillor Edwards and to the sponsors and to the mayor's administration as well. This is an important discussion. I also want to highlight what Councillor Flaherty said. I'd like to see us continue using access to technology to make sure everybody's voice is heard in community meetings. But let me add something that has to be said. I represent a large immigrant community. I represent the most residents living in BHA. It's very difficult for a lot of people, for seniors, to access Zoom, to access webinars. For my immigrant community, it has been a challenge to access Zoom meetings as well. And then when we switch from Zoom to another one, WebEx, it's even more difficult. And many of them may not speak English, or many of them may have very, very limited experience working with computers or technology. So I want to highlight that issue. I also want to highlight language access challenges as well. So when we consider making changes, I want to make sure that my constituents, their voices are heard in the process. And that includes the voices of immigrants, of seniors, of people living in BHA housing that may have difficulty with technology to get access to some of these meetings. Also, I have a lot of residents that live in high rises in the Chinatown area, and sometimes they cannot access the internet effectively like I can in my own home. So those are issues I want to focus on and want to make sure that we address those as well. Again, want to say thank you to Council Edwards, to my City Council colleagues, to the City Council support staff as well. They've done an excellent job during the COVID, as Council Flaherty mentioned, and it's good to be with David. It's good to be with my neighbor in South Boston, Eddie McGuire, as well.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. I think I have all the councilors in, and now I'm going to turn it over to some of our guest speakers. I'll announce them in order of speaking. It would be first Jim Weiss from the Boston Center for Independent Living, followed by Sabrina Rosa from Student Immigrant Movement, followed by Kate Crockford from the ACLU. And in all transparency, I did want to acknowledge that I am no longer, but I was a board member of the Boston Center for Independent Living. I worked with and know Jim Weiss from that capacity. I just want to put that on the record. So Jim, how you doing? And feel free.
I'm doing great. Great to see you, Counselor, and everyone else. So good morning. My name is Jim Weiss, and I live in South Boston and work at Wellesley College. And as Counselor Edwards said, I am a member of Boston Center for Independent Living, as well as Boston Self-Help Center. And I'm very pleased that you're considering providing remote access to Boston City Council meetings. I should probably, there's a colleague of mine that always introduces herself and she'll say, you know, what she looks like, I believe for folks who might be blind or visually impaired. So I will share that I am a power wheelchair user, and I've got a mustache, I'm wearing a white shirt, and I am Caucasian. So with that said, working full-time outside of Boston, I work at, again, Wellesley College, and being able to access this Boston City Council meeting and really any other meeting that might require transportation is really a godsend for me. I would prefer that this not be something that I would need to request as an accommodation, but you know, it sounds like folks are very supportive of this ordinance. But I think if it wasn't passed, you'd probably find people requesting it as an accommodation, and it might be better addressed as what I would call, and many would call, a universal design approach that gives everyone access regardless of disability. And I would be supportive of both the remote and in-person access to meetings. So likely if I were to try to attend a 10 a.m. meeting physically in Boston, it would probably take me half a workday to do it. Might even be longer, factoring in MBTA rides and whatever else. Instead, right now, I'm just kind of swapping out some time, maybe working a little later or doing lunch stuff. And in the wonderful world of Zoom, I'm seeing something popping up on my screen that somebody's trying to call, so I will squash that a second. You know, I guess I am also fortunate to have personal care attendants who are able to help me get to work and get me up early. But there are a lot of folks with disabilities where a 10 o'clock meeting might mean that that's the normal time that they would actually be just up and ready to go. So for them to attend this type of meeting, being able to jump on the computer would be a way that would make things accessible. Let me see what other notes I have. I think without, beyond kind of the disability kinds of areas that people are considering, and maybe including disability, there are folks who have childcare responsibilities, healthcare responsibilities with family members, and again, the work and travel, all kind of combines to make this challenging. So I would greatly support a hybrid model for access. And as I just kind of came into this webinar environment for this meeting, I would also encourage you to, I know you're recording, I'm assuming that the recording will then have text available for people to review, but I think you should also consider accommodations in terms of captioning and how this will be posted on the web and what you might want to do in terms of process for folks who either need accommodations, whether that's something that's automatically done or, ideally it would be automatically done or built into Zoom, or if you're posting this on YouTube, doing some editing. But I guess I would, in closing, encourage you to continue with this, but consider some of those factors as well.
Thank you, Jim, for some incredible, powerful testimony. I think access from a lot of our folks in the community who have disabilities, as Councillor Flynn and I talked, a lot of them are veterans, a lot of those people have served, there's so many different ways in which people come in and out of having a disability in their life. And I think that the city of Boston, and by the way, this applies to all public meetings for the city, not just city council meetings. There would be BPDA meetings. I think we would try to at least have that apply to that. It would be for the CONCOM meetings, hearings for the commissions, all of those different meetings that are open to the public. I think that this would actually make them truly open to the public. And I think it was incredible, powerful testimony about what it means to physically move around, to wait for a car to get here in rush hour traffic, to do all of those different things as well are things worth considering. And I just want to thank you for that powerful testimony, Jim. Going on to Sabrina Barajosa.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sabrina Barroso. I work with the Student Immigrant Movement as an organizer. First and foremost, I'd love to say thank you to Jim and to all the counselors who spoke before me. I think it's really exciting and very beautiful to hear everyone talk about inclusivity and access, to folks being able to, come and share their voice, which is super powerful, I know, for everyone to hear, especially during a time where it was incredibly difficult for many families of Boston. I think the power of people showing up shows how much our city cares about one another, about our stability, about our well-being. And I'd also really love to highlight some of the concerns that Councillor Flynn was talking about in terms of access and folks still learning about how to use computers, how to use apps, which is super important. And I think that as a community, with the excitement that we have around still being able to contribute our voices, it will be a way for us to, really figure out how to get more folks involved and share that knowledge that, is important for folks to be able to hop on and join calls like this. So like I shared before, I work with the Student Immigrant Movement, and I work as an organizer. So a lot of the work that I do is with young people who are either in high school, transitioning into high school, or folks transitioning into college. And one of the things that I had noticed the most, one of the biggest troubles that we had was with, getting young people to actually be able to come to hearings and different events happening at City Hall. And this is because, right, as a young person, not only are you juggling maybe like, different sports, homework, right, but a lot of young people are also taking care of their siblings, right? So a lot of the times the response that we would get, one of the biggest things for us is young people getting involved in what's happening in their community. So we would always be trying to, invite young people to come and testify, at least to be present at a hearing if they hadn't testified before. And one of the things that would always come up is like, I have to go home because I have to take care of my siblings, right? Like my parents work all day. And we can't afford childcare or anything, so I need to be the one that goes home and takes care of my siblings. And you can see, right, when young people do want to participate in something, and it's just really difficult for them to be able to manage it, so they end up just making the choice that is most realistic to the issue at that moment, right? Which is, I need to go home. And it's completely understandable. And like everyone has been saying, right, if you're a parent, it's the same thing. You might be working and there is no time for you to go to City Hall, find a place to park your car or take the T, right? And then have to manage like how I'm getting back home and everything. So, that's something that I would just like to highlight as a real life story about many people in the city of Boston, just in terms of highlighting the values of, well, what everyone has been highlighting of inclusivity and having access to an opportunity to be able to share that power of speaking your mind and sharing, your story, what's happening in your life. As it pertains to a particular, docket or like a particular ordinance, something like that. And so it's a really beautiful thing for folks to be able to feel like I have the power to join in and to say something. And so, I'll just keep it at that. I know that everyone here is kind of on the same page about, moving forward on this. And I would just like to say that, I think it's really beautiful for us to think through, like, how do we make this even more inclusive, right? Like, do we do little pamphlets that kind of have step-by-step how to use something? I'm sure that there are plenty of ways that we could think through how to make, technology more accessible to the folks who have been struggling with it a bit. And yeah, I think it would be really cool to see, the city council really model a hybrid structure at this time and, moving forward. I think that there are many other places that can also really benefit from using that structure, like in terms of, the school committee, right? And then also having, proper translation like Councillor Edwards was talking about. So, I think it would be a really beautiful opportunity to be a great role model in the city of Boston with this structure.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for that powerful testimony. Again, understanding how much access is about democracy. Thank you. We're going to go now to Kate from the ACLU. I can't hear Kate. Can anyone else?
No, can't hear Kate.
Oh, and I apologize. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Braden, one of the lead sponsors, is also here. Kate, before you go, can we go ahead and let Councillor Braden speak?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for my tardiness. I was moving between locations and I got stuck in traffic. Yes, I'm really, really excited about this ordinance. During COVID, we realized that many of our virtual meetings had a massively increased attendance because people who had childcare responsibilities, people who were taking care of elders, were able to join our meetings remotely and participate in the conversation and have their voices heard. So I'm really, really excited about this ordinance, and thank you for what I've heard so far. Sounds very, very good, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Kate Crawford from the ACLU.
Hi, yes. Sorry about that. Apropos of this hearing, I have a plumber in my house right now trying to fix my kitchen sink. So apologies for the distraction. My name is Kate Crockford. I am the director of the Technology for Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts. On behalf of our more than 10,000 members and supporters in Boston, the ACLU is excited to express our strongest support for docket number 0442, an ordinance expanding access to local democracy in the city of Boston. So as we know, the pandemic ravaged our city and our world. It exposed long pre-existing inequities. It forced us to make drastic changes to how we live, work, and play. And it also changed practically overnight how our local governments conduct business. Naomi Klein talked about the shock doctrine. Out of disasters come new innovations, and sometimes those can be actually beneficial for people. So here's one of them. We are very excited to work with the city of Boston to ensure that one change that was brought on by the pandemic sticks with us forever. And that's what we're here to talk about, expanded access to local democracy. So as many people have said during the pandemic, participation in public meetings in Boston exploded. For the first time in the city's nearly 400-year history, residents could not only listen in on the deliberations of their local government from the comfort of their homes, but could also add their voices to these important debates and conversations. So all of a sudden, working people, caretakers, people with disabilities, low-income people without access to reliable transportation, young people, and elders could join in and contribute their voices to discussions on issues that matter to them in their communities. I just want to say something about the nature of this ordinance and, frankly, about the ACLU's larger efforts to try to reform the law in this area across the state. I've heard a couple councilors say that there are concerns about ensuring access to in-person meetings for certain communities who can benefit from, who maybe aren't technologically savvy or don't have access to the internet. We 100% agree. And this ordinance does nothing to restrict the public's access to city council meetings or other open meetings in the city of Boston in person. We believe very strongly that the right path forward for the city of Boston and for other municipalities in the state is for the open meeting law not to be reformed in the sense that we don't want to create the opportunity for local governments to meet only online in the future. We want city governments to do what Boston is doing, to pursue hybrid meetings so that folks who want to be in the room, who want to be able to rub shoulders with their city councilors, to shake somebody's hand, who may have accessibility challenges in terms of accessing a computer or the internet, can show up in person. But for people who can really benefit from remote access, that is provided as well. And so I just want to applaud the city of Boston. The city council is a leader in this space. We have not seen many communities across the state adopt the kind of open and transparent posture that the city of Boston has. Unfortunately, last month, the state legislature actually failed to extend a requirement that local governments provide hybrid meeting participation options. What they ended up doing was saying that open meetings could either continue to be fully remote or they could be fully in person. The legislature did not actually say that municipalities have to provide a hybrid option if they're going to be meeting in person. So we were very disappointed with that, and we're going to be trying to work with the legislature to fix that on a permanent basis to ensure that that's not a problem for other communities. Fortunately, as I said, that's not Boston. The Boston City Council has opted to continue offering members of the public a remote participation option, even as members of the body increasingly elect to meet in person, which is wonderful. So we applaud the City Council for your commitment and your leadership in terms of access to democracy and transparency. The proposal before you essentially just codifies that practice. It ensures that we never go back to the pre-pandemic status quo when, your ability to participate maybe hinged on how much money you had, your ability status and things like that. So we look forward to working with the council, the administration, and the people of Boston to swiftly pass and implement this important ordinance. You all have long been a leader in transparency and access, and we're confident the city will continue to lead the way out of this difficult time towards a brighter, more equitable, and more engaged future for all of us. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to, now that we've been kind of gone through the pros and cons for this, I didn't know, just looking right now to the administration, based off of the overall concept, were there certain things that you felt needed to be added, clarified, or any questions that you had or considerations we need to have as a city council? I'm just putting it back to administration. I understand we're all on the same page. It's just really kind of like, how do we craft the best?
I mean, I think the timelines that we have established in the ordinance of 7 days is something that we already practice. There are particular models, I mean, such as the hybrid model, that we're going to have to continue to work with, the DUA team as well as our colleagues in the city council to accommodate. Where we've had and I know you mentioned the BPDA earlier, they are also on the same page as us moving forward, not only with virtual meetings, but also a hybrid model. And they've had a team up there completely focus on that and how that they would facilitate their processes on those. But I mean, overall, with respect to the ordinance, I think it's just a matter of logistically staying on the same page with respect to the capabilities technologically, as well as knowing that each neighborhood is semi-different. So there are areas such as Chinatown where, a hybrid model seems to be where we're going toward because of the demand for more in-person meetings, as well as just the, just regular demand there. I know Orient Heights is another area that they would like to have more in-person meetings and things like that. So we're just focusing on making sure we listen to as many, constituencies as possible. And like I said earlier, we're regularly in contact with language access. So the demographic needs change pretty regularly, and we're just trying to adapt and change as quickly as we possibly can. That being the case, it does take some time to line up the contracts and the necessary support to enable these things to occur. And it's not something I think that can happen overnight, but I do think it's something that we've been working toward and we've been, making a lot of ground on. And so as we move closer to actually enacting the ordinance, we just hope to highlight that, in the background, there's technological things that we need to establish, whether or not we stick with a single platform, be it WebEx or Zoom, and how accessible those things are, as well as making sure that they fit the needs of the different offices that we, interact with daily. I mean, just for example, the abutters meetings that we have are regular. I mean, before the virtual meetings, we were literally holding them on the sidewalks, and so it's just come a long way to the point where we have more activity, more people participating. And at some points, we know that we might need to do some things in person, but we also don't want to diminish that. So how do we balance, the liaison, facilitating an in-person meeting while also having someone conducting or, the electronic apparatus as they have to include it. So we're more than willing to work on it. We're amenable. We've been amenable throughout these last 2 years and continue to be. So, as leaders of the city see fit, we will continue to operate as such.
And I really don't have much to add to Eddie's statement. I mean, we are, like in my opening statement, we are very much agreeable to this. I mean, it's really just looking through in terms of, and I think it was mentioned earlier in the session to determine which platform that we would be looking at, the Zoom versus WebEx and the features and functions of each of them, especially around the language component of that. And it's really just around making sure that we have the appropriate agreements in place and that we are in lockstep with with the various departments and the city council. So we are on board. Just want to make sure that we have all the I's dotted and T's crossed as we move forward.
Okay, I see Jim, you raised your hand, and then I'm going to go through and ask some quick questions for folks to get feedback on the language. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so not necessarily to slow down the ordinance, but I heard Councilor Edwards talking about staff and kind of working in that disability services space. I mean, I think what David and Eddie were talking about in terms of identifying platforms and all makes sense. And I think it would be helpful for the staff to get some guidelines as to how to do this kind of stuff. And so nobody's recreating the wheel. And maybe it's a video on how to set this stuff up. And again, I mentioned captioning. There may be, so some of these platforms have built-in captioning. You may want to network with some folks, maybe at the Mass Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I know all the kind of the canned YouTube captioning, they're not perfect. And so is that something you use? Is it the script from the Zoom meeting? If you're doing it real time, do you hire a captioning service? Is somebody doing some editing real time? All of those logistics, I think, are helpful to put together. I wouldn't stop the ordinance for that, but I think it's something that you may want to think about to help the staff and to make the experience uniform.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through city councilors now with questions and thoughts. I'm going to kick it off with some questions that I have, because I want to make sure that people would be, one, okay with this ordinance including some form of required outreach and education. I think Sabrina brought it up, but I think there should be an understanding of, before this becomes effective, that the city is required to do a massive outreach and push to say that this is going to be an available opportunity for folks. The worst is making us more accessible and no one knowing about it. So I do want to make sure it's truly successful and uniform, that I assume on all notices going forward, there will be required that there's a link or location on the physical notice and online and in the email saying where they can access it. I do think there's a certain level of uniformity we do need to adopt also in how we conduct the meetings. I know with BPDA, you don't see other people and they let people speak or they don't. With other folks, everyone's all in and the chat's open. It can be all sorts of different things. So again, I agree with, I like the way Jim phrased this. I'm not going to stop the ordinance for that, but I do think when we go into the working session, we need to consider about what uniformity looks like. What's the baseline? You will have, access or the ability to see people, the ability, and I think we do have a baseline at least for disability and for language, but there's still inconsistencies. There was Go Meet, then WebEx, then Zoom, and all these different kinds of ways. I don't want to promote a specific vendor, but I do think we need to have specific standards that we adopt. I also think we need to be clear, not everyone has access to the internet or computer or a cell phone or has the data or can afford to do that. So we should also be clear that if you cannot physically access it from home, but still need to be remote, a local library is an option. We should say you can access internet, access, I don't know, BCYF facilities, but there needs to be a list of community facilities that the city of Boston has that are, physically accessible for those with disabilities. And I think all of our city buildings are, I hope that they are, but that also if someone could, you may be able to get to the Bremen Street Library in East Boston better than you still can get to City Hall if you don't have internet. So I think part of the notice conversation is where can I access internet if I don't have access to it at home, but I can't get to City Hall. So I would like that to be part of the notices as well. I just want to note that this ordinance does not apply to BPS. And at a BPS meeting recently, I had a constituent of mine pay out of pocket for ASL interpretation. And but this doesn't apply to them, but we could still set a standard, hopefully that they would rise to the occasion and hopefully be consistent with us. I think someone mentioned working parents. BPS is every meeting that they have is involving working parents. And so they need to make sure whether the working parents have a disability, whether those working parents speak English or not, or whether they need ASL, that it's formally accessible as well. And not just right now during a pandemic. I am curious if there's a way to have, and maybe we already have this, a community calendar with all the meetings up where there's one access point, one button to click, or one link to get to, so that if I see on the community calendar for the city of Boston, BPDA meeting on East Boston Greenway, I find it, I click on it and I have access and I'm in the meeting remotely. I'll kick that to David or to you guys a little bit, but I'm talking about like technology wise. I think one point access is really key. If I don't get the notice, because I don't live in East Boston and ONS does the 300-foot, if I don't get it, but I still care about the Greenway or care about environmental, if I just want to go and find meetings, I want to know that there's an access point or if that's a possibility. Maybe we already have a calendar and we just need those. And then I think what else? So what? I do want to make sure we're clear about the definition of public body. Public body is a multi-member board, commission, committee, or subcommittee within the executive or legislative branch within the city of Boston, however it's created. So I know that Eddie brought up abutters meetings. That is the O&S going above and beyond this ordinance. As I understand, that is not by definition a public body on this ordinance. So unless you want it to be, unless we think it should be, or if we think we're excluding or not including enough of public interested conversations, I want people to understand that this is what it's limited to, which is public body conversations. So that's putting it out there if you guys think it's not expansive enough. I also wanted to touch on the enforcement aspect of this. Again, I know that the city of Boston very much seems to be supportive of this, but it does have an enforcement aspect of this. Intentional violations, and it involves retraining, suspension, termination, all of these different things, none of which would override the already protected union protections that a person has or the due process that they have. But this is to prevent someone from hiding the ball. But that's what's in there. That's also what we're going to subject ourselves to. I have heard from, and I just want to give a shout out to Kerry Jordan, who basically allowed for us to continue our business. He works in central staff here. But I have also heard from central staffers that the 7-day notice is might be particularly burdensome for them. And so I will work with them to figure out what kind of notice provision or language is less burdensome, but also make sure that the public maybe has more access than 48 hours, which has been a concern expressed, but I did want to let central staffers know we heard you. There's a genuine concern about that. I know this is a lot, but, and then there's a question for, so I had a question for David with the community calendar and 1-point access. Are there any challenges that we are creating, especially for those in the disability community, by online hearings? I don't know, but I was curious what Jim's thoughts may be about that. And so those are kind of my out there thoughts, 2 really questions, but also what I see the language having to address as well. So Jim and David, then I'll turn it over to Liz and Julia and the other counselors who are still here for any of their thoughts and questions. And then we do have 2 people who are here for public testimony. I believe, I'm not sure who Sarah McCammon is, but I know Johnny McGinnis is from BTU. So David, and then
I'll go first. I believe that you do currently have a community calendar. I will follow up and check on that. In terms of the access, I just want to make sure that I understood what you said in terms of the uniqueness of each of the meetings, that there's not one generic link for all the meetings to kind of one-stop shop, click in and you're into the meeting, that each meeting in and of itself is unique. And may or may not require a password. I know you talked about that with around standardization of how the meetings are going to be run and whether you see participants, you don't see participants, you require a password, you don't require a password, things of that nature. So I would just want to make sure that I understand when you talk about kind of a single link to kind of click on within this kind of community calendar and then you're in, what exactly that means.
Well, I guess because I kind of want to see it just like if I open up a door, I'm in the room. I'm able to participate. I'm able to be part of something. And I didn't want, with the inconsistent, this is a BPDA meeting, so that's going to need a password, and this is going to need this, and me to register in advance, and so on and so forth. Like, I didn't know if there's a way to make it so that people, even if they're in just to participate, but if you're going to speak, there might be another something else. But it has to be uniform because people are disappointed when they feel like they've signed up or can't speak. We have some ZBA hearings, literally people told, you're not speaking today. We don't have time. That's not ideal, but also it's not fair.
No, it's not. And that standardization, it's one thing to say, through the last whatever 15 months of the pandemic. But, going forward with these hybrid meetings, it does give us an opportunity to really kind of hammer out what that standardization looks like, across the city, so that, as you mentioned, we do have multiple platforms that we use. We use Google, we use WebEx, we use Zoom, and we seem to use them in different times for different reasons for different departments. That we need to really iron out a standardization on that, so that it is, to your point, Councilor Edwards, that when you open a door, basically you're there in a meeting. And that what that experience is when you get in there. And I think, Jim had kind of touched on it earlier, that at the end of the day, it really comes down to the user experience and making sure that, what you think is going to happen is exactly what is going to happen, and that there's no surprises when you get in there, because then that is the disappointing part of it, where you feel like you're not participating and where your voice is not being heard in the process.
Theoretically, I would think that you could have the same Zoom link for all of your whatever type of meeting it is, right? So you could use this link, as far as I know, for a future meeting. And so you could, in some ways, either save that, have it standard, or possibly, they have these kind of little shortened links that might say Boston City Council Ordinance hearing, and that could also make it so that if somebody knew that there was a meeting coming up, but they had trouble searching around for what's the link and it's a different link, you could have all your hearings at the same time, as long as they didn't conflict with something else that you were trying to do.
Exactly. Spot on, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you both. Councillor Mejia, then Councillor Braden for any questions, thoughts, or conversation. I know Councillor Mejia is balancing herself a wonderful getaway and necessity. So I'm going to go ahead and.
Sorry. I was just trying to find my Zoom, my link here. So I just have a few questions, just bouncing off of Councillor Edwards, your question. I'm just curious, we've seen a number of people participate in our city for the first time thanks to Zoom. A number of people, particularly seniors, don't have the skills currently to access these spaces, nor can they participate in person. And I know that a number of our community groups are doing senior Zoom trainings courses. And how can we implement a training component in this space or empower community groups who do? So I'm just curious if any opportunities exist to include that type of support in this ordinance. And then the other question that I have, and you also alluded to it earlier in regards to the WebEx feature. I know it is, having used WebEx, it is, it's kind of awkward because you don't get to see who's in the space. That particular platform is cumbersome. And I'm just curious if it's possible to just across all of our city departments, just to be consistent and use Zoom, which is the platform that most people have learned and mastered at this point. So I'm curious if we would be able to kind of push for some standard around utilizing Zoom. So it's one thing that people are learning how to do across all departments, instead of having multiple different platforms that you just never know what you're going to get when you register. You find out, oh, it's WebEx, now I have to figure out how to use it. So is there a way for us to standardize it and make it consistent across all meetings in one platform?
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Any thoughts from the administration on uniformity in the vendor space and standards? I understand we can't technically just say it will be a vendor of specific name brand, but to echo Councillor Mejia's point, if we had standards across the board, no matter what you come in as, you need to provide the following things. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, me and our team has been working, as well as, other departments, with Do It regularly, discussing, the flaws of whatever platform we're using for those particular meetings. And we've had conversations about focusing in on particular platforms, one of those being Zoom, and about the accommodations they make. Like any, major decision in procurement, there's a few things that we have to go through before we can acquire them. But we hope to have more uniformity in the near future, especially working in line with this ordinance. And even like you said, especially with meetings that might not necessarily be in line with the actual ordinance, but reflecting, the actual traits that we want to see in every single meeting would be a situation as well. So we're not exactly there yet, but we are working toward doing that. And I know that, our other departments are using Zoom and some are using WebEx, but we're almost at the point in which we could probably procure one. So.
Edward, could I just follow up to that? Councilor Edwards, is that okay? Could I just have a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So in regards to WebEx,
Yep.
what I have experienced myself and have heard from other folks is this anonymous situation where you hear the person's voice, you don't see who's there. It seems to me somewhat impersonal, and there's something to be said when you can actually I don't know, it just feels awkward. So I know we can't pick a vendor, but whatever it is, it should be something that allows for that sort of feasibility to be able to know who's in the Zoom or who's in the room or who's ever in the space, just because it just feels a little weird.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely not the only person who mentioned that to us. I think, in the beginning of learning these platforms, it's, just normal individuals who are facilitating these meetings, be it a liaison or, a liaison to a different department. And some of the concerns were specific to like Zoom bombing and different things like that. So to help mitigate those, there were these type of features. That being said, it definitely, a random voice just talking from the abyss isn't necessarily something that people feel comfortable with. So we're more than willing to accommodate and, put in, work on the requirements of the meeting to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where, the people's screen they're showing inappropriate images, but we also know who is in the meeting and why they want to participate. So I don't think it's a heavy lift. I do think that it's just a matter of having conversations about the platform, its capabilities, and when such things should and should not be enacted.
Yeah, and so, and I also would like to just kind of ask one more question in regards to just safety and precaution in regards to those folks who are undocumented. I know that if there's any way for us to really think about, if you're speaking here, I know we can't, I'm just curious about what provisions we can put in place to allow some sort of safety, just in terms of participation, just because I know some folks who may be undocumented may have some concerns about participating in a public forum. So Councilor Edwards, you could just put me on mute if you think that this is a crazy question, but I'm just kind of foreshadowing some folks who may have some concerns with their status and being in a public environment and how we may want to kind of get ahead of that.
I actually, just real quick before you respond, what you brought up has been brought up before when discussing recording civic association meetings to me in East Boston, and the concern of having people on camera when they didn't want to be, and that was when the camera just faced the audience or just had everybody on there, and by virtue of you walking in the room, you were suddenly on camera. So it's a valid concern. I do think the difference is, depending on the standard of which we set this, you may or may not choose to turn your camera on. There might be levels of anonymity that you may be able to maintain. You may be able to just put your first name in there. So the participant on the remote access may have more control over how much information about themselves that they put out, which I think will help address that very valid concern, Councilor Mejia, versus when the same exact concern was when a camera was just shoved on people and you happened to be in the room and you had no control. So I think that people might be able to strike the balance for themselves a little bit better. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would say that with respect to our guidelines, I mean, there has to be a public campaign to educate individuals on how to use these networks. It's not something that we can just implement. And my office plays a pretty vital role in that, as well as Boston 311, which is another office we oversee. And we're more than willing to make sure that the guidelines go out to everybody as to not only protect yourself, but also to make sure everyone feels comfortable coming. Our goal is always to make sure that individuals, no matter what their status is here, especially in the city of Boston, they feel comfortable being able to express their opinions. And, I've been in scenarios where, exactly as described by Council Edwards, either facilitating a cannabis meeting or something, someone would come up to me after the meeting and tell me that they are very concerned with having been put on camera. And trying to address that and having conversations with either a news network or the independent film person. So it is definitely existing, but I think that it is something that in our public outreach campaign we can address and let people know that these are the things that you should implement if you have any concerns with this. This is a safe space. This isn't something that we're going to utilize in order to jeopardize anybody. It's just to get public opinion. And so, but we're also, like I said, we're always more than willing to, adjust and do whatever we need to do to make sure the guidelines and accommodations are for everybody. But it's definitely, it's a very real thing.
Thank you. And that, again, public education, we can craft that as part of this. Councillor Braden, and then we're going to go to public testimony.
Thank you. You've touched on many of the questions I had or the issues. I really feel finding the disparity between our different users' experience on different platforms and also depending on who's facilitating the meeting has varied I think we've gotten better over the last 16 months, but just the notion that when you go into a webinar or a Zoom, that when there's very often the presenter puts it in a webinar mode and not a meeting mode, and it just you just end up talking to people rather than being a two-way conversation. I think knowing who else is in the room, who else, not these anonymous voices that come out of the abyss, is really important, because you should have to be able to recreate the sense of it being like a community meeting where you know who's there. You can, I love and enjoy the meetings that have a very open format, that you know who's there. You can make comments in the chat. You can ask questions in the chat. It becomes a really rich dialogue. Whereas if the presenter or whoever's in charge tries to control it really tightly, you end up quashing the dialogue, and it's not what we're looking for. So I really feel that getting to a place where we can get some agreement on the across the board standards, regardless of what platform we're using, would be very good. I have to say WebEx is not my favorite one. I think it has been a little clunky. And again, it is getting better, but there are severe limitations. And I'm delighted to know that the BPDA are working on this as well, because in our neighbourhood in Alston Brighton, the most frequent community meeting is usually about a development project, and the BPDA is running the meeting. So I hope they're vigorously engaged in this conversation as well about public access to meetings. Thank you.
I can assure you the BPDA will be.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't have any other questions or comments.
No, thank you. And I do appreciate the clarification. BPDA will be under this ordinance. But BPS, again, we don't have the authority. So I don't know if Johnny McGinnis and Sarah McCammon, if you would like to participate. Johnny, go ahead.
Yes. Should I go ahead now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Breeden, and members of the Boston City Council. My name is Johnny McInnes, the Political Director for the Boston Teachers Union. The Boston Teachers Union supports an ordinance expanding access to local democracy in the city of Boston. Throughout the COVID pandemic, our city councilors, along with other groups who hold open meetings for their constituents across the city, had to learn on their feet, so to speak. We all learned to navigate how to provide an opportunity for voices being heard, communicating with the people being represented, as well as sharing much needed information. Once we began adapting to the circumstances, we saw an increase in participation at City Council. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't edit that correctly. I want to also acknowledge that through City Council virtual hearings, you have provided a learning opportunity for constituents to have a better understanding of how city government functions. When hearings are held during the day, many people have other obligations, as mentioned prior, and it has been an unequitable challenge to attend in person. As I speak on behalf of our BTU members who are teaching students during the day, they are not able to participate during their workday. Remote access has allowed for access with more participation to the open meetings. I will reference the BPS budget hearings, for example, at City Hall when I sat in the chamber with counting on one hand or maybe both hands on who was in the room, not including BPS staff. But as councilors, you have witnessed there were quadruple observers during the process. It made it more transparent. Through remote access, an opportunity has been created. For example, individuals with disability or those that are senior citizens who have access to technology are not always able to physically access hearings to attend in person. None of this should negate the fact that we do look forward to having hearings in person. Again, we support continued remote access, allowing a great opportunity for the democratic process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah McGammon, if you could state your affiliation and as well when you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Sarah McCammond. I am the Executive Director of the Harborfront Neighborhood Alliance. We bring together neighborhood associations of East Boston, Charlestown, North End, Downtown, South Boston, and Dorchester to ensure resident voices affect the growth, development, and sustainability of an accessible Boston waterfront. And I want to thank Councilors Edwards, Breeden, and Mejia for this important legislation to establish permanent remote participation option for all public body meetings, the technology accessibility for people with disabilities and those who speak languages other than English. This will elevate community voices in public process. And as Councilor Edwards mentioned, we would like these same considerations extended to all commission and city publicly engaged entities, including the BPDA and abutters meetings. With the end of the state of the emergency, the anticipation was that public meetings be hybrid and an in-person remote meeting format going forward. And although the state of emergency extended open meeting law, it ends on April 1st of 2022. We would like to also reiterate Councilor Flynn's, Mejia, and Braden's points that one platform should be chosen across the city to provide greater familiarity and ease of use, functions, and interactions. We would like to strongly recommend that the use of a transparent platform that provides two-way engagement, allows attendees to see who is in the room, chat with each other, and provide comments and questions that are not curated out of view by a meeting organizer. This is important to build trust and connection with the community. We also understand there are issues inherent in both online and in-person formats. It's our expectation that a hybrid format would be better. We encourage the utilization of digital tools such as polling or surveys, encourage submission of videos for commenting, and by utilizing digital engagement tools and continuing to innovate and create best practices, the result will be better public engagement experience with greater input from residents on the neighborhoods they live in, work, or visit. And just a quick note, there was a discussion about a 7-day meeting notice and the challenges that prevents or provides to the staff, and just would like to say that the public really needs 7 days in order to clear their schedules and attend these meetings. So I just wanted to point that consideration as well. Thank you very much.
Sarah, you had wonderful suggestions. I especially love the video testimony as an option for folks. Are you providing written testimony or at least some notes so that we have that as part of our record?
I'd be happy to send my comments in writing.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to go, I think that was it that we had for public testimony. And we did receive written testimony from other folks. But ultimately, my goal is to have a working session on this and this particular language and making sure we get into specificities. Again, as Sarah mentioned, for example, wanting butter meetings to be part of this. And so I don't know if Ed McGuire from ONS has any thoughts about butter meetings being part of this ordinance.
I mean, to be honest, we do 7 days. A lot of the things already highlighted, we already try to do on a day-to-day basis with respect to a butters meetings. I think it's important that how a butters meeting play a role leading up to the meetings that would be defined by this ordinance as it is. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, and I think is important, is that the abutters meetings and other meetings that we facilitate, be it Article 80 or others, the comment period never closes. So technically, if you don't make it to the meeting, there are a variety of different options for you to reach out to our office or the offices that would be facilitating that process and provide your feedback so that we can, take that either be in a written form, be it a snail mail letter or an email or a phone call, document it, and then make sure it's sent to the appropriate boards for review. So I think there are some logistical aspects from an abutters meeting standpoint that we would have to discuss with respect to a hybrid model. And, typically my liaisons are doing more than one meeting a night. I know Lena and Haley Dillon, a few others are doing multiple meetings a night. And so trying to make that logistically work could be somewhat difficult, but we're always, like I said earlier, we're always more than accommodating. We always try to operate on a 7-day to 7 to 14 day notice schedule. So there's not a lot of things that are in this ordinance that we're already not trying to practice. I do think though, some of the larger scale things such as the public outreach campaign, unifying the platform, and then logistically getting the guidelines down is something in a working session we'd like to do. And as we discuss them, I think, I'd have a better understanding of how easier or what difficulties would be implemented. But just some of the things I highlighted there are what I would say is concerning, but also we went from having meetings on the sidewalk to where we are today, all within, a international pandemic. So I'm not afraid to, get down and work on this and see what we can do.
We know. Before I go to Councilor Braden, two quick notes. I don't know that the language is clear on its face that this would apply to IAGs. I do think that that's something we should consider, or I'm putting out to everyone. I do think the impact advisory groups, that's what that stands for, from that are usually part of the Article 80 process. That come back and forth. They're usually people from the community. They are appointed, but I don't know that they are a board or a commission or committee or subcommittee per this language. But I'm going to propose definitely having IAGs be part of this and that their meetings be also hybrid. If someone from the BPDA might want to talk to us about what that means in terms of cost and infrastructure that they may need to now build out. It's one thing to have their regular zoning commission or BPDA board meetings hybrid, but if we're also talking about every single IAG meeting around the city, that might be an infrastructure kind of build out. And speaking of build out, I did want to ask the administration, this has a 90-day buffer. So once passed, there's 90 days before it is truly effective. Do you think that's enough for the public campaign? Do you think that's enough to build out anything we need in terms of vendor, either vendor selection or vendor consistency and standards? Do you think 90 days we can get this done?
From a public campaign perspective, I think 90 days, being 3 months, we usually do 3 to 6 months. So it's something we could accommodate. And typically it wouldn't be something that we would just stop after that 90 days. We would continue to push that information out. With respect to procurement and the conversations around unifying under one particular platform, I think that would be a conversation with the procurement office as well as the capabilities to do it and what is, their current situation and apparatus. But 90 days is somewhat quick when it comes to municipal government, but it's also, I think a sufficient amount of time to kind of get the guidelines in place.
Thank you.
I think on the technology side, I think it, I agree with Eddie. It is probably a little bit quick, but I think it's, I think we could do that. It's really just about determining what the standards are in vendor selection and features and functionalities that we want to have as we compare product to product and decided, our standardization moving forward. But, I think it's achievable.
Thank you. Councilor Braden, and then Johnny McGinnis from BTU has raised his hand.
I think another important group to maybe have at our working session, maybe some representation from Boston Public Libraries, because that is a location where many folks who do not have access to their own reliable internet, you get online to do all sorts of business in their local libraries. And I think having the library partner with us in educating their customers, consumers who come in and out of the libraries all the time, but also having them be aware of the opportunity to perhaps to provide a remote location where a small group of local residents could join a meeting remotely from a satellite location, so to speak. So having their thoughts on their ideas on this might be helpful as well. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Councilor Braden. Johnny McGinnis.
I'm sorry, say your question again?
I noticed your hand was raised. Was that from the first time?
From before. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, my apologies. That's me.
There we go. I got it.
Okay. So unless there's any other further comments from individuals, what we're going to do is schedule a working session to make sure we clarify the language, put in certain committees' thoughts from the public, and also make sure that we're clear on the enforcement aspect, as well as making sure that we have, we really work out the 7-day notice. I want to be clear, central staff is not in opposition to having more notice. They're noting a practical reality of how we move in the council. And so this is not an opposition. This is a make sure when you're talking about this, you realize how this impacts us. And that's what that is coming from. So we want to make sure we do that, and the working session will likely have them come in and speak a little bit about that. But I'm really excited about this ordinance. I do think that we can get this done, and I do want to note that we did invite the law department here as well to come and talk specifically about any language concerns they may have, and they will be, of course, invited to the working session. So unless there's any other concluding remarks, Councilor Braden, Councilor Mejia, I'm going to go ahead and end this hearing. So Councilor Braden, Councilor Mejia.
I'm all set. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm all set. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.